When someone dies in the World of Warcraft, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the end for them. If someone near them is powerful enough and skilled enough, they could potentially bring you back to life as you once were. But how often does resurrection canonically happen? How many times have our player characters died and been brought back to life in the lore? Today, we'll go over how resurrections are able to be accomplished, who has died and been brought back, and the circumstances of such. And we'll also answer the question why resurrections aren't used all the time to bring our favorite or beloved characters back to life. Let's get into it. To resurrect is to bring one back to life. It can happen through quite a few sources or means in the lore, but what it accomplishes is the same: putting life back into a person who was once dead. They are also not undead, they're wholly brought back to the way they were before dying, a living being. One commonality that most all resurrections in the lore follow, though, is the condition that the person who's getting brought back was only recently deceased. This would mean that their soul still lies within the Veil. The Veil, in lore, is a place between normal reality and the Shadowlands. We as players can experience the Veil when we die and run back to our bodies. It's like a shadowy version of the normal physical realm. If a person were to be dead for too long, the Kyrian Watchers, i.e. spirit healers, who lie within the Veil, would call forth a Kyrian bearer to take that person to Oribos in the Shadowlands. In this, we see a very distinct feature of resurrection worth mentioning again, that the person must still be in the Veil if they are to be brought back this way. Tyrande, in the Seeds of Faith short story, comes across a dead Night Elven woman who is noted as being dead for several days. Tyrande notes that no priestess of Elune could bring her back because of how long it's been. It is consistently a rule that the lore follows. Well, except for some exceptions, and later on in the video we'll discuss some of the outliers that break this rule. So this commonly followed rule can be seen in the player resurrect abilities such as Revive, Resuscitate, Ancestral Spirit, and Raise Ally, which all have the descriptions noting that they return the person's spirit to their body. Also, not to be overlooked, are Goblin Jumper Cables, which act as defibrillators to get someone's heart going again, but only after they've recently died. Now, some who die too young are allowed to be brought back to life by spirit healers, or Kyrian Watchers, themselves, as we see in the quest Limbo located in Bastion. When deciding the fate of a child who has come to the Shadowlands who died from becoming ill, if you choose to return to life, the Kyrian tells you that they unfortunately cannot allow every child to return to life. And if you decide to send her to the Shadowlands, the Kyrian says you are correct. Sometimes we nudge children back to life so they can accumulate more anima, but unfortunately even children cannot be immune to death. Other circumstances that lead Kyrians to allow ones who come to the Shadowlands to be brought back to life are those who are doing battle with someone who is disrupting the balance of life and death, such as a necromancer. A Mantid who died and came to the Shadowlands died fighting one such, and was allowed to return to life to go and defeat the necromancer for the sole purpose of not allowing him to continue to disrupt the natural cycle. Now, for some examples of resurrection in which we might be familiar with, let's take a look at an early example newer players might be familiar with. On Exiles Reach, which is the new 1 to 10 zone you can choose to level in, priests get a quest called A Priest's End. Some of the other recruits died on the expedition, and you are asked to say some prayers over their corpses to put them to rest. As you're doing so, you find that there is no time for such because ogres on the island are going to use the recruits' souls for nefarious purposes. You are then taught how to resurrect by beseeching the light to give these recruits another chance while their souls still linger. This works and you bring 3 recruits back to life. So here we see the reference to the Veil. The recruits have not yet gone on to the Shadowlands as they've just recently died. In Vanilla, at level 12, a Paladin would get a quest to go back to Stormwind and visit the Paladin trainer Dithorian Rahl to study the Tome of Divinity. Along this quest chain, you are then given an artifact which is called the Symbol of Life. Your trainer tells you that it's time to see if you're powerful enough to focus one of the light's greatest gifts, which is resurrection. You are told to find a dwarf in Elwyn, who was recently attacked by the Defias. When you get there, you find him already dead. Using the Symbol of Life, you're able to actually use the light to bring him back to life. It is also stated that the dwarf had not been dead long at this point. When he talks to us, he says that the ability to use the symbol does not just come to anyone, and that we were able to empower it with our own faith. So in this quest chain, we see that not all paladins would be capable of this feat, and that it requires a favor of the light, and also the power of the one doing the resurrecting. Blood Knights also have a similar quest, which culminate in them resurrecting another member of the Blood Knight Order to finish their training to become a Blood Knight. At the end, it's mentioned that you must hurry, as if you take too long, not even the light will be able to bring them back to life. The power for this Blood Knight resurrection came from the vestiges of power left on the Magisters who were absorbing the Naru Muru's power inside Silvermoon. You place them within a file and use them to bring the Blood Knight back to life. The Knight, in this case, used the power of a powerful being, a Naru, to do it rather than the Light's favor. Now, speaking of favor of the Light and power in the Light, we have Sally Whitemane. Sally Whitemane was High Inquisitor of the Scarlet Crusade. In the Scarlet Monastery dungeon back in Vanilla, she would emerge during the last fight against Scarlet Commander Mograine and resurrect him after he fell in battle. When we go back to Scarlet Monastery in Mists of Pandaria, we can see her do the same thing again, resurrecting Commander Duran this time. Sally also has the unprecedented ability to resurrect herself back to life. We learn of this in the quest for killing Whitemane, called Blades of the Anointed, which is given to us by Lillian Voss. She says that Sally and the Scarlet Crusade members keep coming back to life after death, and that to stop them from coming back, and Sally from coming back, the blades need to be stabbed into her to put her down completely. We see evidence of this fact when we fight her in Scarlet Monastery. She's able to cast Resurrection and Mass Resurrection, reviving Scarlets within 100 yards of her. In the period of time between the original Scarlet Monastery and the remake in Mists of Pandaria, Sally has obviously come back to life again. To make sure that this does not happen again, we impale her body with Blades of the Anointed, which makes sure that she won't be able to raise once again. In Sally, we see another important aspect of resurrection through the light, which is the power of belief and faith. Sally, as we see in game, seems obsessive with the commanders she protects and then resurrects. Also, being a member and leader of the Scarlet Crusade, she can also be called fanatical in her beliefs. Many members of the Scarlet Crusade we see are very mentally unwell, and that would go for her as well. The light does not forsake based on your deeds, it grants power based on your belief, responding to zeal, and the more fanatical that you are, the more powerful one can be in the light. And the Scarlet Crusade members have intense fervor and belief in what they are doing. We get further confirmation of this when Darian Mograine is instructed by Bolvar to bring Sally back as one of the Four Horsemen. Mograine admits that despite Whitemane's madness, she held a connection to the light that some of the most powerful paladins couldn't match. So it really is no wonder then that while Whitemane is now a Death Knight, she still retains her ability to use the light. Now, Anduin states in Before the Storm that sometimes if the light wills it, a priest can bring someone back to life. Here we see that the light sometimes chooses to answer a call for a blessing on the revival of a person. The light's favor in such a moment can be seen in the faction short story for Varian. Varian is killed by a Draconid assassin in Stormwind. The short story states, Varian's arm and body fell limp. The others around him urged him to come to the keep as it was too late. Even Jaina urged him to go. Anduin refused to give up his father's life though. Singing a holy song of radiance louder and louder, his hands began to glow with a light that became so bright that it was competing with the setting sun, bathing the entire cemetery in the shadowless light of midday. So, just as the Paladin ability, Intercession, says to petition the light on behalf of a fallen ally, Anduin does just that. Anduin lifted his eyes and voice to the heavens, calling to the very heart of the cosmos for a source of divine power. And in an instant, liquid rays brighter than 1,000 suns burst from Anduin's fingertips, penetrating Varian's body and painting everything around it in a brilliant yellow glow. It is said that those nearby had to cover their eyes because of how bright it was, as Varian's entire being was rocked by the influx of pure light. The light had answered Anduin's call, and Varian was actually brought back to life. So this is a great example of a resurrection taking place through asking for the light's blessing and the light having answered. So there are a few canonical deaths of the player characters that are in the lore where we die and then come back to life. We'll mention them all and then we'll discuss the two big ones. We have to essentially die to talk to Azure Ghost and the spirit healer in Ajara. We die in Gadgetzan to talk to another spirit healer during the Lincoln quest. You also need to be dead to speak to Frank Lorne Forgeright to get the key to open the gate leading to Blackrock Depths. Khadgar kills us during the legendary ring quest in Warlords of Draenor, and then revives us with the Goblin Jumper Cables. And the main two are when we die atop the Frozen Throne fighting Arthas, and then again fighting Argus, the seat of the Pantheon. During the fight with Arthas, he finally decides that he has tested us enough, With one effortless strike, he slays all of our heroes. The player characters cannot even release their body, as it says, your soul now belongs to the Lich King, so your spirit would not be allowed to go onto the Veil, as Arthas is now in possession of it, possibly within Frostmourne. Tyrion Fordreen beseeches the light for a final powerful blessing, and the light responds and grants him such. He breaks free from the ice block and leaps into the air and shatters Frostmourne. When this happens, all the souls contained within the blades are unleashed, one of them including King Tyrannus Menethil II. The released souls hold and bind Arthas in the air as King Tyrannus casts Resurrection and brings all the heroes back to life, who then along with Tyrion finish off the Lich King. When we get to the end of Antorus and defeat Agrimar, the heroes get teleported to the seat of the Pantheon by the spirits of the Titans to sever Argus' world soul connection to the Burning Legion. But Sargeras had other plans and unleashes Argus the Unmaker to confront us. What looks to be an unwinnable battle then ensues. The heroes here are the leaders of each of the most powerful orders on Azeroth, with each of them wielding some of the strongest weapons to have ever existed on our world. And yet, Argus in one fell swoop uses Reap Soul and kills all the heroes. Aenar, the Lifebinder, steps in though, and she saves our lives with the gift of the Lifebinder, which allows us to release our spirit and walk to the sprouted tree to re-enter our bodies to resurrect. So with these instances of player death, we can see the rules of resurrection readily applied. Our player characters were not dead for very long, and were allowed to enter our bodies and or be brought back by a powerful resurrection ability. Now let's get into some of the weird outliers. One of these is Lei Shen the Thunder King, and the other is Medivh. Lei Shen was a Mogu warlord who came to be after the Mogu had already contracted the Curse of Flesh. Lei Shen stole the Titan Keeper Ra's power and became the Thunder King. He made alliances with the Zandalar trolls and thus gave one of them, the Zandalari leader named Zulthara, a method to revive him just in case anything should happen to him. Later, Lei Shen died at the Twelveir's hands when he tried to claim the Forge of Origination for himself. They then activated the Forge and instantly wiped out all life within the vicinity. Years later, we see Lei Shen get revived during Mists of Pandaria. The method that he taught the Zandalar High Priest had been passed down to the modern day. Now, this resurrection seems to be of a higher quality and possibly of Titanic origin. So you can consider this a special case, as Lei Shen was dead for thousands of years and was still able to be brought back into his own body, which had still been preserved for these past thousands of years. Keep in mind though, Lei Shen also stole a Titan Keeper's Titanic powers for himself, so that might also factor into it of how he was able to do that. His body was well kept, and the method used was not normal. It's a possibility that Lei Shen, when he died, was in fact in the Shadowlands and maybe joined a covenant and was living a new life, and then got ripped back to the physical world when he was resurrected by the Zandalari. And when brought back, lost his memories of being in the Shadowlands. We know that Mogu actually do go to the Shadowlands, as we see a Sin Stone found in Revendreth of Shan Bu, who was herald of Lei Shen. Another possibility is that he could have had a phylactery, which would have been able to store his soul while he was dead. He could have given this phylactery to the trolls, who then used it to bring him back thousands of years later. But we really can't speculate much more than that. A side note about Zandalari Resurrection: during Vanilla, the players kill High Priest Venoxus in Zul'Gurub. His body was later recovered during the Cataclysm, as Zanzal the Outcast was able to use some of his strange elixirs to bring him back to life, a resurrection. It seems that what was ultimately necessary for this to work was the body of the deceased, as they also tried to bring back High Priestess Jeklik to life, but they could not, as the body ended up being destroyed before that could happen. It's stated that his elixirs were the source of his power for this resurrection, and those brought back to life this way were the same as they were in life. An explanation for this could be the Loa, as the Loa have the ability to bring people back to life. Vol'jin besieged Bonsambi to return the spirit of his human friend Tyrathan Court when he was mortally wounded by a Mogu spear on Pandaria. Another instance of a Loa resurrecting is in Zuldrak in Northrend, where the Loa Harkoa asks you to use her whiskers on her dead children to resurrect them in the quest, but first my offspring. Whether Zanzal is resurrecting people with only his elixir's powers or the help of a Loa is not definitively stated, and there's really not much more that we can find out. Jin'do, as well as Garajal the Spirit Binder, both seem to have the ability to transfer their spirit from one body to another, as Jin'do comes back from death just as he was after he was killed, and Garajal says that he can do the same when defeated in Mogoshan vaults. Now, as for Medivh, there could be a few things at play here. As mentioned with my previous video on immortality, arcane can be used to allow one to live for a very long time. Merrill Fellstorm has lived for 3,000 years this way. It is said that Egwene stored arcane energy for years and used it to bring Medivh back to life. He was dead for quite a few years, and you would think he would have passed the Veil and gone into the Shadowlands. But Medivh died inside Karazhan, and it seems that Karazhan holds onto the souls of those who die in it, and don't allow them to head over to the Shadowlands. The reason for this could be where the tower is actually situated in Deadwind Pass, where there lies a nexus underneath the tower. This theory can also be supported by the fact that the other denizens of the tower have returned back to life as well, such as the Curator, who was killed back in the raid during TBC, and now appears again in Legion. It could also be that Medivh, being of incredibly strong will and mind, was able to keep his soul from traversing past the Veil into the Shadowlands, as Chronicle Volume 3 tells us that Egwene felt Medivh's soul drifting beyond the Veil of reality when he was reaching out to her in a dream. From the in-game book, The Dark Portal and the Fall of Stormwind, we know Medivh was in the Veil for some years. It says, by killing Medivh's body, Lothar and the young apprentice inadvertently banished the spirit of Sargeras to the Abyss. As a consequence, the pure, virtuous spirit of Medivh was allowed to live on and wander the astral plane for many years to come. Another name for the Twisting Nether is the Astral Plane, so it seems he could have just been drifting there because he had Sargeras in his body for so long. He ended up in the Twisting Nether rather than the Veil. Though when this was written in 2002 in The Last Guardian, the definition of what they meant Astral Plane to be might not have meant Twisting Nether, as in the official World of Warcraft strategy guide, which was written in 2004, or a bit earlier, another name for the Veil is the Astral Realm, so we really have no way to know for sure. So whether it was because of a weird influence from Karazhan, or because of his incredibly strong abilities as a Guardian in keeping himself from passing past the Veil, this too can be noted as a special case of resurrection. Another case worth mentioning, which was touched on a bit earlier, is Jin'do. In the Break the Godbreaker quest, he says that when he last died, he survived as a shade in the Veil. He says his tenacity kept him alive. He broke the will of others who resided there in the Veil and devoured them, when with each one he got closer to ripping a hole back into our world. He was obviously able to do this until he got back into a new body, resurrecting himself as we see him again in the Dungeon Zul'Gurub in Cataclysm. Now, the High Priest player character for their Order Hall campaign resurrects quite a few people during their quest lines. One interesting one that they're involved with is that of Natalie Seline. Natalie, knowing she was going to die, split her spirit from her body and sent it on. Instead of going to the Veil, though, it went into the Void. The members of her group watched her body for a long time, hoping for a way to retrieve her spirit to bring her back to life. The priest enters the Void and defeats the Void Essence, which then retrieves her spirit and then reunites it with her body outside, bringing her back to life. So one last very strange outlier that we're going to discuss is the curious case of Crusader Olakin Sainrith. This Crusader was abducted in Icecrown before the Argent Dawn and Ebon Blade could attack the Fleshworks. It's noted that he probably has been dismembered and turned into parts of an abomination by the time you were speaking with the quest giver about this Crusader. So you go down and recover his body parts. You're then tasked with taking them to the Sanctum of Reanimation, which is above the Fleshworks. Using a spool of thread and a knife called the Doctor's Cleaver on his remains, on the reanimation slab, somehow the Crusader is resurrected fully and completely back to life. He's not undead, nor is he reanimated, but he's truly brought back to life. This is the strangest happening of a resurrection, and the only thing that can be assumed is that the reanimation slab is special somehow and can bring someone back to life, even if their body is cut up and mangled into different pieces. So now that we've covered the outliers, based on what we've learned so far, let's go over why our favorite characters can't necessarily be brought back from the dead with a resurrection. Let's use the example of Varian. He died sacrificing his life to give time for everyone to escape the Broken Shore during the start of Legion. Gul'dan burned his body with Fel to the point where his whole body seemed to turn to ash and possibly explode. Even if there was someone there powerful enough to ask for the Light's blessing to bring him back, his body was no longer intact for his spirit to go back into. You could say the same for any other character who's now maybe a severed head or cut in half. Characters whose bodies are now just skeletons in the dirt would no longer have a body to go into. Now you also have the example of Valajar, who are given new bodies when Odin and the Valkyr raised them to live in Skyhold, but this is a unique circumstance seen only with them. I suppose if Odin wanted to, he could resurrect a character back to life in a new body, created by him, but that still would only be possible if their spirit had not gone to the Shadowlands already. As we've seen Varian spirit in the actual Shadowlands, he no longer remains in the Vale and wouldn't be able to be brought back. But it is still worth noting that if Blizzard really wanted to, they could bring any character back, as means and precedent for it to happen already surely exist. Whether it's through a new body that you find and jump into, like Jin'do, or a new body to be made for you, such as the Valajar, or if the person was very far aligned with a specific power, such as Natalie with the Void. Resurrection in Warcraft is quite complex in its nature, and although it doesn't happen every day, it has happened quite a few times. Some of our own notable and favorite characters have died and come back to life, and even our own player characters have canonically died a few times and been resurrected. So, what are some of your favorite instances of resurrection in the lore? Let me know below. For me personally, I really resonate with Anduin beseeching the light to save his father. The description the short story gives of the blinding radiance of the light as liquid rays, brighter than the sun, really shows in that moment the power needed to bring someone back to life, especially in response to Anduin's plea. I really hope you enjoyed today's video and were able to glean some type of new information out of it. If you found this video elucidating and enlightening, then please join me again to discuss more mundane, obscure lore in the World of Warcraft. This is Storm1 University, signing off.